Hello, my name is Gatz, and this is my grandpa, Reverend Frederick Cook. And I am interviewing him for my living history project. I am interviewing him because I think he has done many great things in his life.
Okay.
So, let's start off what year were you born in?
What year was I born?
Yeah.
I was born in 1937.
So, we have all these phones and computers and stuff, so what kind of technology did you have?
Pardon?
What kind of technology did you have when you were...
Oh, what kind of technology do I have?
Yeah.
Well, my skills really were in mechanic.
Oh,
I actually all my military service I was a mechanic on various planes that I'll show you later on, but also automobile mechanic. Actually, I have a mechanical mind. I mean, I fix TVs. I fix my own televisions. I fix typewriters. I fix whatever gets broke, and Xerox machines. I just have that type of technical mind that does repairs, things like that.
yeah. So, what was it like growing up in the 1900s when you were born?
Now, when it was, see, I'll have to, you have to talk louder. I can't hear you.
Oh,
I probably should get my hearing aids in. Really,
Right.
would be. I should have forgot that,
Right.
but usually you have to
Yeah.
speak up.
okay, so, like, you know how, in what year were you, what was it like growing up in the 1900s?
During the 1900s.
Yeah, what was it like growing up?
Oh, growing up was, for me, I enjoyed growing up. I really did. I was born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in the living room of my grandmother's house, which was very common back then. A lot of ladies had their babies at home rather than go to the hospitals, because the hospitals back then were not as elaborate as they are right now. And so I was born at home, and I do not remember the house that I lived in, where my mother and dad lived, and I have an older brother and an older sister. But I do remember my grandmother's house and my grandpa, Frederick Stock, whom I'm named after. And he was a tall, rather thin man. He had a mustache, and I always remember his hair was gray. And I remember that house, and a couple of things I remember about Milwaukee that kind of stand out. I was between 3 and 4 years old then. One was upstairs. They had a big house that had a large staircase going up, and then there was a large upstairs entryway, so to speak, where all my toys were kept. And then there was a long hallway with, I think, 4 doors on one side and 3 doors on the other side. And I used to race down that hallway with my little short legs, touch the window at the end, and race back. But this one time I was going to race down there, and here was a chair sitting there with a man in it. And I didn't know for sure who it was, and so I thought, well, I'll just run around him. I ran down there, he grabbed me and put me on his lap. And he said, "Hi, Freddie." Well, I didn't know exactly who he was. So he said, "I'm your grandpa." He said, "I want to show you something. Would you like to see a quarter with cowboy pants on it?" And yeah. So he got out this quarter. Later on I learned it's a walking lady, what they call a walking lady quarter. Oh. And on the back was, what he said was a pair of cowboy pants. And I looked, and sure enough, looked just like the cowboy pants with the ties that cowboys would wear, the slats, the leather slats. And he said, would you like to have it? And he gave me that quarter. Well, believe it or not, I believe that was cowboy pants all the way up until I was with a group of men around a coffee machine some 45 years later. He said, would you like to see a quarter with cowboy pants on it? And I showed them that, and they all kind of laughed. They said, Fred, that's a flying eagle. So I wrote it over as sure enough, it's a flying eagle. So, but that was one experience. And the other experience was that my uncle, called him Uncle Vic, he owned a coupe Model A Ford, black. And there's a coupe would hold a driver and one passenger because the gear stick was on the floor. And then in the back was what they call a rumble seat. There's a spare tire, and then there's a handle up there, and you turn that handle and open it, and sure enough, there's a seat in there. So my dad said, we're going to take you for a ride around downtown Milwaukee. So my cousin and I got in that back rumble seat, and it was partly cloudy. And we were driving around downtown Milwaukee, but the clouds all gathered together and began to rain. There we were in the rain, and it was July, so it was a warm rain. And my dad and my uncle kept looking back at us laughing, and we were back there shielding ourselves from the rain. We got home, and my mother said, were you out playing in the rain? I said, no. You know, but I was just 3 years old then, so. But after that, then we moved. And that's when we moved down to a cottage, kind of in the middle of the woods, just off of Lake Winnebago. Now, Lake Winnebago is a very long, very good-sized lake. And Oshkosh is on it, where they have the fly-in, and it goes all the way up, and it's fed by the connection of this Lake Superior and Lake Erie. And it comes all down, and then at the foot, at the bottom of the lake, there's called Fond du Lac. And Fond du Lac means foot of the lake. But we lived in a cottage just around by the woods, and the thing I remember there is my mother always told me, now, we had a long gravel driveway, and she said not to go out down that long driveway and onto the highway. It wasn't a real busy highway, but it was a road. And so one day I walked out there and I looked one way and looked the other way, and here was this farmer, and he was saying, here boss, and the lead cow was following him, and then a whole herd of cows behind him, and he was going to take them down the other way to where they go out into a field to graze. So I was standing there and I said, here boss, and lo and behold, that lead cow turned and started walking toward me. And you know the way cows walk, they kind of take big steps with their heads, go back and forth. And I had just little short feet. I was just, like I say, between 3 and 4. And I started running, and the cows kept coming. And I ran down my driveway, and I could feel the cow was very close to me. And I knew I wasn't going to make it to the side door of my house. So I jumped up on this big doghouse that we had with a great big roof and got up on the very peak. And my mother leaned out the screen door and she said, Freddie, what did you do now? There's a whole herd of cows all gathered around that doghouse. And the farmer came down and was laughing, and he said, well, he just called, and the lead cow went his way. He led the cows out. The other thing I remember about that place, as little kids do, I had a long stick, and up in the tree was this pear-shaped type thing, and there were some hornets flying around it, so I kept hitting it with the stick. And the more I hit it, the more hornets flew around. And lo and behold, I hit it once and it fell to the ground. No, a whole flock of hornets came out. And I dropped the stick and I started running for the back door. And before I got to the steps, my mother opened the screen door. And she looked, and 4 hornets had stung me in the back before I got in the door, and then she closed the door. But outside of that, I remember about that. And then from there, we lived there a short time, and then we moved into the town of Fond du Lac.
So, you answered like 3 of my questions here. So, you know, when did you? So, when did you move to the Fond du Lac place?
When do I live?
No, when did you move?
From it?
Yeah.
Okay, I stayed in Fond du Lac then. I started kindergarten, and we moved several times right in within the town. It wasn't a real big town, but it wasn't small. Fair size, and we lived on a corner house with a porch that went all the way around, and just a block down was what they called Bragg School, grade school. And what I remember about that was that this was the time for me to go to kindergarten. So my older sister took my hand and she walked me up there, and I walked in the door and I couldn't believe how huge that place was. Of course, I was very small. And right in the middle was the gymnasium with basketball hoops and everything. And all the classes went off of that gymnasium, and they went into the classes. And then up above was a track, a running track. And then all the classes went off that running track. Of course, my kindergarten was right down on the main floor. My sister walked me over there, and she says, "Okay, Freddie," she said, "now, this is where you go in, and you go in there, and the teacher will take your coat and your rug, you know, that your lady took naps on, and then that's where you stay, and I'll come and pick you up when it's over with." So she left to go to her class, and I was kind of looking around, and I was a little bit afraid, so I turned around and walked out. And there was the dog sitting there with a leash on. And so I picked up the leash, and I wandered home, and walked up on the porch. When Mother came, she said, "Freddie, you're supposed to be in school." And I said, "Well, it was kind of a big school." She said, "Where'd you get the dog?" I said, "Well, he followed me home." And she says, "Well, why don't you let loose of the leash and he might go home?" So I let loose of the leash and the dog took off. Well, that was my experience then. And we moved to another house. And that's where I met one of my good friends. And his dad had a racing horse and a mare in the garage. And he made stalls, and outside was the place where they put the manure. And the thing I remember about that is that Glennie, my friend, always had to clean out those stalls. And he put it in that wagon outside. Well, one day, he threw one of the horse apples at me. They're rather dry, you know.
Yeah.
He threw it at me, hit me in the back. Well, I had another friend that was with me, Ernest, and there was another one, I can't remember his name, but we all grabbed those things, and we were having a horse apple fight, and his dad pulled up in the driveway. And he said, he told us boys, "I think you boys better go home." And so Glennie had to pick up all of that himself. So that's what I remember about that. And then I went to school there. And of course then we moved again down on, way down by the highway.
Oh.
In the fairgrounds. Now the highway ran across this way. The fairgrounds is over here, and there's another street that connected there. Then there was my street. And then at the end of that on the other side was an A&W root beer stand. It was orange, the old-fashioned type, and the open doors and the yellow lights to keep the bugs away. Yeah. And what we used to do, they had baseball games out there. The Brewers used to play out there because they had a big racetrack, And then they had a big stadium, huge stadium. And all the people would go there and watch a baseball game, so then we would go there the next day and collect bottles. Coke bottles, 7-Up bottles, and knee-high bottles. And we'd get our wagon full, take it to the store, and got 2 cents per bottle. And with 3 of us, we had to save, and at the E&W stand, it cost a nickel for a root beer,
Yeah.
and a dime for a hot dog. So finally, we all had 15 cents that we'd saved. So we're walking up there to buy a hot dog and a root beer. And lo and behold, just beyond the root beer stand was an open cockpit double-wing biplane. Give me this one here. Looked very much like this one. It was sitting there, and the pilot was there, and he had a leather hat with the goggles up on top, and a leather jacket, and a white scarf, and pants that looked like riding horses, riding horse pants, and high cuts, and he had a sign. It said, "Rides, 15 cents." What a dilemma. A little guy like me, and I had 15 cents, I could get a hot dog and a root beer, and I loved airplanes, or I could go for a ride in that airplane for 15 cents. What should I do? Well, my stomach gave away to the hot dog and the root beer because we worked so hard to get it. But that was, then many other things happened. The other thing I remember is that there was one block where the houses went around the block, but in the middle was this big field. And what they would do is they would take and put a old railroad car, small caboose type railroad car at the end, and they would freeze that whole lot.
Oh.
And it was a huge rink. And then when the snow, we always had a lot of snow in Fond du Lac because of the lake. And they would plow that, and the banks were up on the sides, and well, it was a good half a football field across, a whole football length of field. It was a big rink.
Yeah.
And I remember going ice skating there, and in that, then there was that warming house where they had a pot belly stove and kept it warm. We put on our skates, and that's what I remember about that. Many things happened. I remember the other thing is at the fairgrounds where they had the races, and horse stables were way over here, and another was set over here. He used to race horses and play baseball there, and that stadium would get filled with people. Well, it was the Second World War was on, and because I was about maybe 7 or 8, born 1937, it's about 1944, and they brought in over 500 German prisoners and put them in that big stadium. And then he had a fence that went all the way around it. What I remember most was the army guys in full army uniform with a rifle on their shoulder and a police dog on a leash. And they would, there was, well, it must have been 12 of them, and they would walk the fence so far, turn, and go back. And they did that all the way around the fence, they're guarding the prisoners. And they had all these German prisoners that they'd housed in this big stadium. So that's what I remember mostly about that.
Wow.
And then lived there until I was in the 3rd grade. And at the end of the 3rd grade, my dad had got a promotion. He was in the bread business. Back then they had door-to-door bread delivery. Yeah. And he was promoted to a manager and moved to Columbus, Ohio. So in the 3rd grade, between the summer of my 3rd grade grade to my 4th grade. We moved to Columbus, Ohio, lived there a year. And just a year. And I was in the 4th grade there. We moved again because he started his own bakery.
Yeah.
Big bakery. He had 40 or 50 panel trucks. Huge. And he and 4 other men went together and started his bakery. So we moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And that's, moved there, I was in the 5th grade, we lived on the east side. And the river, Fox River, split the town. It was a good sized town. It's Aurora, Illinois. We moved to the east side and I went to the 5th grade there, and in the 6th grade we moved over to the west side. And that's when I started playing football. I lived there until I was a sophomore. And I played football, and that was the only sport I played. And the rest of the time I just worked like newspaper jobs and working at the grocery store, delivering groceries and things like that with my bicycle. And then eventually I worked at my dad's garage when I was in the 9th and 10th grade. And then we moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan, where he started another bakery. And Grand Rapids, Michigan, where there's a lot of events that happen in Fond du Lac. Just a lot of them that I can remember. And we moved to Grand Rapids, Michigan. And I was a junior in high school. And that's when I decided that I wanted to be a pilot. A jet pilot. Fighter jet pilot. But I decided that a little bit late because I hadn't studied math, which you need to have.
Yeah.
Because back then you had to do your own navigating. And but it didn't stop me. I determined I was going to be a jet pilot, and I graduated from high school, from Godwin High School, and then I went on to the Grand Rapids Junior College for a year and tried to catch up on my math.
Yeah.
But I didn't do very well because I hadn't prepared. And that's going to be important for all the young people, to kind of determine somewhat early in your life what you think you'd like to do. And then study hard and prepare for that.
Yeah.
So that when you do graduate and you want to get out into that field, then you're well ready. See, I was not well equipped. And so I did enlist in the Air Force, and I was a mechanic on the airplanes. Took tests to become a pilot. They didn't have the academy like they have today. You took the test and passed it, then it sent you to a flying school. Well, I couldn't pass the test because of the math. I passed everything else but the math. And then so the first assignment in the Air Force was this airplane. It was air rescue. This is an SA-16, and Captain Leeper, I used to fly with him, and he let me fly co-pilot, and he was the pilot, and he would let me land that plane and take off, because he knew I knew how to fly, because I got my flying lessons, took flying lessons and learned how to fly when I was 13, and so I got to at least ways fly this and land it. And nice, and it was there for a little less than a year. And I had been in the service for 2 years, the Air Force. And so they shut down the Air Rescue Unit on Cape Cod, Massachusetts. That's where we're at. And I was sent to Japan. And when I was sent to Japan, it was in 1960. And this is the plane. It's called a B-50 bomber. And this B-50 bomber then was converted over to a mid-air refueling. And you can see, I don't know if you'll be able to see it on there, but if you want to hold it closer you can. But there it is, and that's flying that. And you might want to show the other one.
Right.
Yeah, that's a closer look, and that's me in the cockpit. And so this was a refueler. They remodeled it, and on the wings they had on the very end hoses with a birdie, very much like a badminton birdie, but it was bigger, with a long hose. Had one on the tip of each wing and one out the back. And we modified our plane with 4 reciprocating engines, meaning that it had a large 28 cylinder, largest engine built, with a 16-foot prop radius, big. And then we also modified it, had 2 jets, so that we could, when we were going to refuel planes that were coming across the Pacific and going to Vietnam, the jet planes could not make it from Hawaii where they would take off. There were F-86s and F-101s and F-100s. And we would have a rendezvous point. We would go out and make circles at one place, and we'd just keep circling. Now, because of Vietnam and the communist MiG jets, which is a fighter jet, wanted to be able to find us and shoot us down. Because if they could shoot us down, we would refuel 30 planes, 30 jets. They would take off at Hawaii, and we had a rendezvous point over the Pacific, and they would find us, and then they would come up and we would refuel 3 planes at the same time. And they would put their probe into that birdie, and we would refuel them. It didn't take very long. We could fill them up really quick. And we could do 30 jets. And so we always had 3 planes, and sometimes a group of 90 planes was coming across.
Wow.
And we would refuel them midway, and then they could make it down to the Philippines at Clark Air Force Base, and that was where they would land. And then from there they would refuel and go on to Vietnam. And so this is, I flew on the plane right in the nose, and when we landed, whatever was wrong with the repair with the plane, I would repair it, along with the crew chief and along with the other crew chiefs and mechanics.
Yeah.
There was 3 mechanics, the 3 crew chiefs, and we would repair what was ever wrong. Fuel up, we could hold 176,000 pounds of jet fuel.
Wow.
Because our bomb bays had big synthetic tanks in them. And then there was the fuel for our plane.
Oh, yeah.
So it was a pretty good sized plane then. It was the largest bomber there was, but there was no guns on it. It had been converted to mid-air refueling. But during that time we could not talk on the radio.
Oh,
And if we did, then they would pick us up over the radio waves, and then the big jets would come out to get us. And also we didn't have lights on it,
oh,
but it was and you can see in that picture, it was very shiny. Very bright, shiny aluminum plane, so that it looked like a diamond in the sky. And the jets coming over looking for us could see it real easy.
yeah.
They would line up and refuel and go back down to the Philippines. And we did this for 19 months. And every time we went out on a mission, we would be up in the air refueling anywhere from 12 hours to 16 hours. The pilots would get really tired because they always had to be flying. We could never fly a straight line because then their radar could pick us up. And the radar wasn't as effective as it is today. So if we just did a jog, a crooked line going out to the rendezvous point, the radar couldn't keep track of us. And the way I'm hard of hearing a little bit in one ear, and it gets, as I get older, it gets worse. And the reason being is that we loaded a cargo plane at the Philippines, and we're going up to Midway, which was a fueling base, way up north in the Pacific. And we overloaded it was a C-130. You see those flying around.
Yeah.
And the back door drops down, that's how you load it.
Yeah.
Well, we overloaded it because we put a Jeep on that back door and raised it up.
Oh.
Well, we were at about 25,000 feet and about 2 hours away from Midway.